Welcome to Modleak. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Modleak we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host Modleak Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday and share it as the Modleak podcast on your favorite platform. This week's Parsha is Kiteitzei. The Torah teaches that one must return a lost object to its rightful owner. The great sages Abaye and Rava use this as an opportunity to argue over the dynamics of loss and despair. We swim into this iconic Talmudic text to find out what we have lost. So join us for Lost and Found. Well, Rabbi, welcome back to Modleak Disruptive Torah. It's great to have you. You were in Chicago last week, but more importantly, I saw a post on Facebook. You were on the Ellie Fishband podcast, and I'm going to include a link in the show notes to it. One of the memorable lines, and he's clearly a very Orthodox rabbi. He wanted you to come onto the podcast and talk about unity. You said you want to talk about conversions. And he said about you, his passion for Gerut does not come without a smear of controversy. A smear of controversy, Rabbi. Is that what you have on your bagel every week?
Is that pretty funny? He had a good turn of phrase, right? Hopefully we achieve a smear of controversy in our discussion today about the parsha.
If not controversy, at least a little, I would say we're going to be studying the Talmud, which is my happy place and which is my nurturing place. So if not controversy, at least consolation. And after all, we are still reading Haftarot that have to do with consolation. So I'm covered, right?
Okay, you're ready. Let's go.
Okay, so in Deuteronomy 22, it says, 1 through 14, if you see your fellow Israelites' ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your peer, Hashev teshivem la'achicha. If your fellow Israelite does not live near you, or you do not know who the owner is, you shall bring it home, and it shall remain with you until your peer claims it. Ad derosh achicha oto v'hashivoto lo, and you shall return it back to him. You shall do the same with that person's ass, you shall do the same with that person's garment, and so too shall you do with anything that your fellow Israelite loses and you find. You must not remain indifferent. Wow, it says, lo tuchal litalem. You shouldn't really hide your face from
right,
it.
That's what it means.
So in this just very concise paragraph, it echoes something that was more fleetingly offered in Exodus 23. It says, when you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back. Hashev teshivenu lo. We have really something that I think, because of the Talmud and because of the beautiful tractate of Baba Metzia, and it's being used maybe as the introductory tractate that every Bachur Yeshiva, certainly I, was introduced to, this has kind of become bigger than you might expect. But clearly, it's important to return to somebody what is theirs, and this became a major mandate. What was your experience with these rules?
You know, there's no question that I learned Eila Metzias at the beginning of my Gemara exploration too. So I actually know the Mishnah of Eila Metzias Shalov Elu Chayiv Lahachriz more than I know the Pasuk, because, you know, that's just something that's ingrained in me. So this is a good topic, and I think anyone who went to yeshiva is going to be able to relate to this topic.
And hopefully, if you haven't gone to yeshiva, you will listen to these two Bachurei Yeshiva talking about this. and understand, at least from my perspective, where I developed such an attraction and love to the sea of Talmud. At the end of the day, we are talking about lost objects and found objects. When I read a text that I explored the first time in my youth, I really am engaged in lost and found. And I never know what I will discover that I have lost, and I never know what it is I'm going to find. It's wonderful to go back to a text that you studied in your youth. Is it not, Rabbi?
It's the best. It is the best. So let's get going.
So, in the second chapter of Baba Metzia, it says, Elu Metziot Shalo ve'elu chayav lahachriz. These are the found objects that you can keep, and these are the ones that you have to announce. Then it says, Elu Metziot Shalo. So, again, everything in the Mishnah, which was an oral tradition, is designed so that we remember it. And it almost has a sing-song to it. So, b'may madlikin u'b'may ein madlikin. We say every Friday before services, what can you light with? What can you not light with? And then it talks about what you can light with. So, these are the things that you can keep. Matzah peirot mefuzarot. If you found fruit that is scattered. Ma'ot mefuzarot. Money that is scattered. So the key thing here is everything that we're going to talk about are objects that have no distinguishing qualities to them that the person who lost them could use to identify them. I think if I stopped there, we'd all be on the same page. But we're going to see that the Talmud goes one step further. It's not only that he doesn't have the ability to identify them, but it's because he doesn't have the ability to identify them that he gives up ownership in it. And that's where this becomes so exciting. But let's continue. Kikarot b'reshut harabim are bread that you find in the public square. So now we're not only talking about how the objects are laid on the ground, but where they are laid in the ground. If it's lost in Grand Central, it's going to have a different status than if it's lost in a small nook. Ve'igule develo kikarot shel nachtim, bread of the baker. So bread of a baker is going to be different than homemade bread, because when we make bread at home, you can see it's artisanal. You can see our fingerprint on it. But when it comes out of Pillsbury, not so much. So already we have a society that's used to having division of labor, and there are professional bakers. And then it goes on and it gives a bunch of other examples, and it concludes, Hare elu shalo divrei Rab Meir. All these things you can keep because there's no distinguishing characteristic. These are the words of Rab Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol sheyesh bo shinui, everything that has a distinction, a difference, chayav lahachriz, you have to announce. You got to go post it on the lost and found billboard.
Right.
Ketzad, matzah igulei ubetocho cheres. If you found a piece of food and inside of it was a coin or something, kikar betocho maot, a piece of bread and there's money inside, these are all distinguishing characteristics. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Amar called kli anpuria ein chayav lahachriz. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says any object that is, and he uses a strange word, ampuria, which is I would say a Greek word, you do not have to return. Just kind of fascinating. I think, Rabbi, you and I could say about half of it, maybe a quarter by heart, because, again, we studied it when we were young. They say when you study things when you're young, it's
you
like
never
waiting
forget
on a
it,
blank
right?
sheet. That's right. So these are all friends of ours. Now, in the first thing that we're going to discuss, because we are talking about lost and found, is a word that we don't understand, anpuria. So if you go into the Gemara, it says, Rabbi Shimon said, Elazar said, if one finds any anpuria vessels, what are anpuria vessels? Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says they are new vessels, as the eye of its purchaser has not yet sufficiently seen them to be able to recognize them. It basically talks about something that just arrived from Amazon, and you even haven't had a time to develop a relationship with it, to put any fingerprints or creases on it as the object may be. Rashi says it is still not differentiated by usage that can be well recognized. The language of Ampuria is an abbreviation. He says it's a notricon, which, by the way, is a Greek word for abbreviation.
That's also a Greek word.
And he says, Ein poraya. An puria means there is no proof. So similar to some people who say abracadabra comes from the word abra, I created it like I spoke. That is an urban legend. Rashi is saying an puria is ein, there is not, po, here, proof, or a visible criterion. So again, we are engaged already in lost and found, trying to understand what the words mean.
Right. That's pretty funny.
It's fascinating.
And that's great that the Mishnah, the Mishnah uses a Greek word. That would be like if the Mishnah today used an English word. Everybody who read the Mishnah knew exactly what it meant. We just happen now, 2,000 years later, not to know what it means.
And we live in a day and age where there are those people that say that we should not be influenced by foreign societies, that and Greece is the poster child of
That's correct.
Stay in Jerusalem, not in Athens.
That's correct.
And here we have, in just a few words that I encountered at the age of 14 or 15, we have at least two Greek words, one notricon, which is the word for an abbreviation, but then anpuria. So if you look at the show notes, I absolutely found the Greek word. And the Greek word, it comes from a word that we know well, an emporium, almost a mall, if you will, a trading place, a market. It means merchandise. It means things that are produced. It was clear that they understood what the word meant. There might have been a better word in Greek than in Hebrew because, again, it was something that came with the industrialization of society. So here we have, in this page of Talmud, we are discovering how the rabbis interacted with the world and how they integrated concepts that were all around them into the text. It's just wonderful, isn't it?
Really is fantastic. That's a great thing to start off with. Yeah, that's good.
And so when I went to college, I took Greek, and I said, I got to go learn Greek if I want to understand our texts. So if we continue on what it is that the Mishnah is getting at, and we use our buddy Rashi, when he says Elu Mitziot, he says, if he found something scattered, their owners have abandoned them, so they are ownerless. So again, what he's showing is the distinct approach of the Talmud, where you and I, Rabbi, might say, if it's scattered, there's no way that the person who lost it could identify it. The Talmud has to get into the mindset of the loser and go one step further, that the person who lost it knows that he can't identify it. There he gives up hope.
Right.
Scattered coins. So this instance of nityayashu habalim, the owners have given up hope. Yi'ush is a word that, if I said it in modern Hebrew, would mean despair. It's when you give up all hope. It's an emotion. And here we are saying that the criterion for giving up ownership is nityayashu habalim, that the owner gives up hope or despairs of ever being able to reclaim it. So we have two examples of something that, by its way it's laid out, mefuzar, he gives up hope.
Which means, of course, if you drop something and it's all scattered on the street, you figure I'll never get it back. No one will ever pick it up and give it back to me. But if you lose a wallet and everything's in the wallet and your credit cards are in the wallet, then you think you have a chance to get it back.
Or sometimes you and I are on a hike and all of a sudden we see these beautiful stones that people have really intentionally put together. That's going to be different than a pile of stones that no one ever touched. So I think it has to do with also the way it's laid out. But I have to say, Rabbi, that I was infatuated from the get-go that we were using such an emotionally charged word as despair, as yi'ush, when it comes to ownership. And the second word that really attracted my attention and raised my antennae was twice we have something that is mefuzar. And because it is scattered, it is mefuzar, we give up hope. And I couldn't but think of how whenever the Jewish people are referred to as mefuzar, like in Megillat Esther, where Haman says there's a certain people scattered and dispersed, mufuzar umufurad, we could be tempted to give up hope. Maybe I'm stretching it and I'm going a little bit off the
Rabbi
derech.
Riskin would be proud because that's a nice Dvar Torah. That's exactly what Rabbi Riskin would say, right? Whenever you see the word mefuzar, it means give up hope. And that's what Haman says. He says, Yesh to'am echad mefuzar mefarad ben ho'amim. They should give up hope. They'll never be redeemed because they're scattered.
Absolutely. And the connection between despair and being scattered comes across strong. And then the next thing is this Reshut HaRabim, this public square, which is such an important concept in so many areas of Jewish law, Shabbat and holidays especially. But here the idea, Rashi says, if it's in a public area, everybody tramples on it. And if there had been an identifying mark, it would have surely been destroyed. The same thing goes for the baker. As I said before, Pillsbury, when it produces something and I lose my donuts, I know no one will be able to return it to me. There's no identifying mark. So there are other things that the rabbis bring in that will help define whether one has to return it or not. And they talk about that also. The Talmud brings up, well, maybe if it's mefuzar, if it's scattered, it's too much trouble for the person who lost it to come back and gain it. Or think of yourself in terms of the threshing floor. You go ahead and you pick up all your wheat, and then there's a bunch left on the ground. You might intentionally leave it behind. So that too, I think when something is scattered, the assumption is that either the owner knows that he can't differentiate it is, or it clearly was of no value to the owner. So the rabbis bring in value and they bring in tircha, which is how much people care about something is determined by how much they're willing to invest their labor in. Wonderful stuff.
Really, really good. Fantastic. Okay, good.
So if this is our first day in yeshiva, and this is the first blot, the page of Talmud that we're learning, in 21a, it says, okay, so all of these discussions about whether if it's spread out, you leave it because you have it's not worthwhile or not. In these cases, what is the halacha? Says the Talmud. The Gemara concludes, all these dilemmas shall stand unresolved. Lo mipaked lahu mai teku. So if you are a sports fan in Israel, and at the end of and I'm going to misspeak here, the end of the second half, its score is 2-2. They say that is teku. That is a Talmudic term.
Right.
It's a Talmudic term. You can say it means tied, but basically it's a stalemate, it's a draw, and again, urban legends has it, Teshiv Yitaretz Kushiot Bebayot, that Eliezer the prophet will come and solve these questions. But again, here we come in this beautiful introductory piece of Talmud, and we already learn that not everything gets resolved. Amazing.
That is interesting. I mean, let's just talk about it. The idea of teku means that you say it's a tie, meaning it's unresolved. The urban legend of Tishbi Yitaret Kushiot Ve'ibayot, which means Elijah will resolve it, means we don't like to be in a position of unresolved. So we want to resolve it. So we can't resolve it, but Eliyahu will come and resolve it. So it even tells us something about us.
I absolutely love that. And again, it's kind of similar to Anpuria, where we would like to think that we can retain these traditions for ourselves and that we have a different cut on it. But what my takeaway as a kid was that not everything can be resolved. And if we live in a time and a period where we feel like despair sometimes and we are overwhelmed by what is happening in the world around us, I think this is a little lesson that we need to take with us too, that things don't always get resolved, and certainly people who are pushing for solutions all the time would do themselves a favor if they understood the concept of teku. So here we found something else of value.
Very good.
Now I want to get to the crux of what I remember, and I think the world remembers. The world. I'm talking like a Bachur Yeshiva, as if everybody studies Elu Mitziot. But this is the main takeaway from our sugya, and that is in Baba Metzia 21b, it says, Yiush Shalom Midat. What happens if someone despairs without knowing that they are despairing? How's that? How is that for a profound question?
Okay.
You know, it's like, Rabbi, I say to you, you're sad, but you don't know it.
Right.
So Abaye says, Lo haveish. If you are in a situation where, for all conceivable reasons, you should be in despair, you should be saying, I no longer own the object, but maybe you don't even know you lost it yet, it's not considered from a legal point of view a valid conser. And Rava says, Havei. It is despair. You have given up the rights to own it because, as we'll see, once you find out, you will do it. So it's kind of despair in potential. But I am going to be truthful with you, Rabbi. I cannot believe that Jewish literature and Jewish art and culture has not played with this concept of Yush Shalo Midat, despair even though you don't know it. A little later on in the source sheet, you'll see a picture of the one novel that I found that was published, and the name of it is Yush Midat. And it's a murder mystery that ends with somebody having to do something beyond the level of despair. But I find it to be such an intriguing concept. I can't believe more people haven't played with it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it seems to me that everybody who speaks Hebrew knows the phrase Yish Shalom Midat. That's just what it feels to me like. They may not know where it comes from, but they know the phrase.
But again, it's not part of the nomenclature. People don't use it on a regular basis.
No, I don't think people use it. No, I don't think that's it. It's something people know. Somewhere they came in contact with it. But it's not one of those idioms. It's not used idiomatically in Israel. I think that's right.
So there is a wonderful, I guess, series in Tablet magazine where Adam Kirsch, who's a novelist, he's a literary person. He did Daf Yomi, and he studied every piece of Talmud, and he kind of wrote about it. And when he got to this is the way he characterizes the issue. And if he's doing it from a clinical perspective, he says, is this despair a subjective, psychological condition, or is it an objective description of a person's relationship to his lost possession? I think that's a pretty good, representation of the argument between Abaye and Rava. In Abaye's case, it actually has to happen. We need that person to know that he lost the object, know the circumstances, know that it was mafuzar, or know that it was in a public domain, and literally lose his spiritual connection to the object. And in Rava's case, we need a circumstance where if he would know it, he would give it up hope. It really defines the circumstance more. For Rava, despair can be assumed on logical grounds, but for Abaye, it must actually experienced in order to apply. So these are legal discussions. But again, I would interject that despair, if we want to take it in its most raw aspects, like PTSY, like other psychological situations, there are two modes. One is where you know you have it. You know you're a manic depressive, and others where you don't. It's so I think, pregnant with meaning about the discussing, understanding who we are, and whether we are who we are, if we are unconscious of it or not. I think it's just fascinating. And again,
that is fascinating.
That even psychologists haven't picked it up.
I mean, this is a psychology issue.
And, when you should be in despair and you're not, there's a word for that. It's called denial. And so the fascinating thing is that because the rabbis are truly discussing this in a very clinical way, you would think that they wouldn't get into any of these minutiae. So in Baba Metzia 23a, Rav Zvid said in the name of Rava that this is the principle of a lost item. Once the owner of a lost item says, "Woe is to me for the monetary loss," this indicates that he has despaired of it. And they talk also about a situation where somebody in Baba Metzia 24b, isn't the owner justifiably standing and screaming that the purse belongs to him? What happens if your object gets washed out to sea and you will not give up hope? You are, in Abaye's words, you know the facts now, you still won't give up hope. And it says he becomes as one who screams at no avail about his house that collapsed or about his ship that sank in sea. We have literally instances that the rabbis dig into of people who are in denial, of people who then learn the facts and still won't admit to it. So I do think that this is fascinating that the rabbis are talking about monetary issues, they're talking about ownership of material goods, but they're getting into the psychology of yish, of despair, and they therefore play with concepts of where one is knowingly encountering an emotion, and when one is unknowingly having emotional state, or when one knows that he has this state but is not willing to admit it. Just to me, just so fascinating.
Yeah, that is so interesting, right? To say the other options. I mean, you're just making the point that Yeush really is something that people think about or people address, right? I mean, it's part of the way Jews think about things. Actually, I think the most interesting thing you said today was the fact that teku means a tie in Israeli sports. So you see that, you started by saying how Gemara, we all got it in our youth, but you see that some of these things just kind of latched on because obviously teku and a tie in sports have nothing to do with one another, but still.
So I love the fact that you said that, because I think what the takeaway from this is whether we look at Jewish despair on a legal aspect, or whether we're looking at it on a much more broader literary, psychological aspect, we are not going to resolve anything. And I think the rabbis of the Talmud are clear they're not going to resolve anything. The only thing that they introduce that we have to keep and that has stayed with me all these years is the issues that we have to understand. There's an issue of context. Is it in a public domain or private? Is there an issue of configuration? Is it consciously put in place, or is it found art? Is it spread out? These are all things that have to do with the observant eyes of the rabbi. But there's also this language thing that I love so much. If you noticed a second ago when I talked about what constitutes real despair, and what I said was, it was the owner saying, woe to me that I have lost this object. The word that is used there is the source, I will argue, of oy vey. If you look at Jastro on Baba Metzia 23a, Rav Zvid says, Klal da avedata, kevon da amar voy le lechasoro and kiss. Woe is to me for the monetary loss. If you look at the Jastro commentary, he talks about the word woe, oi. 13 times do we read vey in the chapter about wine. So here we are discovering things that are profoundly related to who we are as a people. There's another area that it says if you have food in a public space, even though because it's in a public space, you can assume the owner is going to give up hope, they said people don't step on food. Ein ma'avirin al ha'ochel. But the rabbis ask, well, what happens if you live in a mixed city? So now already we realize this is the Talmud that was written after the exile from the temple was destroyed. We're no longer living only amongst ourselves. So you have these kinds of questions. And they say that non-Jews don't work on food either because they're superstitious. So again, you have the rabbis understanding their situation, how other people that they interact with. It becomes amazing. But even that Jews ein ma'avirin al ha'ochel, that Jews do not pass by food, there is a Talmud that explains that this we learn from some of the great sages. And I will argue, Rabbi, that when your grandmother saw food on your plate and she goes, we Jews don't waste food, it came back to this very basic feeling amongst the Jewish people that there's something special about food. Food does not go to waste.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is something that Jewish mothers and grandmothers have definitely incorporated into their lives. That's for sure.
So we've been in this for half an hour. My sense is this should be a tease, a taste of what lies in the Talmud. But ultimately, what I take away from all of this is that we don't live in a vacuum, and that when you find a lost object, it's not only what's in your mind, it's what's in the mind of the person who lost it.
That's right.
It's the behavior of the society that you live in. We are all interconnected, and our laws are all interconnected. Our language is all interconnected, and we have a very long history. The one thing that I didn't mention because we didn't have time to go into Abaye and Rava's past was Abaye came from a dirt poor background, and there's a piece of Talmud who said, and my grandmother, I can tell you, said the same thing. She grew up on the Lower East Side, and that was, I grew up poor, but I didn't know it. And that, I think, becomes then the absolute identifier of what it is to have an emotion that maybe one doesn't know one has. I just think
that's great. That's a great way to end. Wow, that's fantastic. Let's leave it right at that.
So have a Shabbat Shalom,
Shabbat
everybody.
Shalom. Everybody enjoy. We'll see you next time. Be well.
We'll see you all next week. Shabbat Shalom.
Bye-bye.